It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat.com, and I want to talk about Jim Ryan and Jim Ryan's PlayStation. I think that there's a lot of angst amongst PlayStation fans about the direction of the company, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I want to start off by saying I think this is mostly fair. People spend a lot of money on consoles. They are looking at a generation ahead of them where they're going to spending $70 on games pretty frequently. And when you have that much skin in the game, it is completely understandable that you might be feeling, or you might be looking around for something to grab onto to have confidence about that investment that you made. Now, I think it's notable to say that it seemed like people had a lot of confidence going into PlayStation 4, and that sort of came out of nowhere, right? There wasn't like there was a lot of games to look forward to at the beginning of the PlayStation 4. We didn't know what was really coming. That we didn't know about God of War or anything like that. But instead, where that confidence really came from was from the narrative that PlayStation built up around itself at that time. It was for the players. They were making the console for the players, and when you compared that to Microsoft, it was very easy to sell that narrative. It was that story was, you look around, you're like, the other console clearly not for the players. I got the one that was. I feel pretty good about this. If it's and all this other stuff's making me feel good, I bet they're going to make some pretty good games down the line. You could just buy into this narrative. It was very powerful. The current PlayStation doesn't have that same narrative power happening at the moment. Instead, they are pointing to, we delivered a number of huge blockbusters last generation. We are going to continue to do that even more. The blockbusters are going to get even bigger. And what are you going to do? Not play the huge blockbusters? No, you're going to play them. You're going to come to us to play these huge blockbusters because you can't miss out on them. And that is, and then there's nothing else really around that. That is the focus. And that is also, I think that is fairly creating some angst. Now, before we get into why that might be, let's talk about some of the, let's talk about Sony's position in the market right now. The PlayStation is the market leader, and I think that is a position that a lot of companies would envy. But it's also a position that is inherently defensive. Sony can only do so much to shake things up, and they, of course, Sony could shake things up a lot more, but it is specifically doubling down on the strategy that worked, and that creates a problem, like a narrative problem in the media and conversations among gamers. Now, when I look for stories to write, I try to find a new idea that is, or a disruptive idea that a company is pursuing, so I can investigate it and explain it to my audience. And do you know what's not disruptive or new or needs to be explained to my audience? That PlayStation is good at making first-party exclusive blockbuster video games. Everyone understands that. Everyone gets that. I don't need to talk about that anymore. It is a given. We take it for granted. Now, on the other hand, Sony's weaknesses aren't very well understood. They are things that we overlooked because it did so well last generation, and so now that we're in a situation where they're not doing a lot like new, they're making new games, but they're not trying new ideas necessarily. It's easy to look and say, okay, well, what are the weaknesses, and are they things that we can explain to the audience right now, or that we can investigate? And if you're a PlayStation fan who just spent $500, you're looking around saying, well, I know what to expect from the games, but where could this backfire on me? And you start feeling anxious about that stuff. And you compare this to Microsoft, where, and this is where I think a lot of the idea of unfair coverage comes from, where it feels like slanted against Sony right now. It's just sort of a byproduct of it's hard to talk about good stuff with PlayStation because everyone fully understands that already. So it's just kind of boring. It's boring to say over and over again, PlayStation has really good first-party exclusives. It's also boring to go over the negatives with Microsoft because everyone fully understands those. We spent a generation going over them over and over again. The company wasn't very good at making first-party exclusive blockbusters. And saying that over and over, very rote, pointless. Everyone understands it. Now, when Microsoft does things that are disruptive and go on the offensive, that stuff is like, okay, this is new. We need to talk about this. Let's explain it to our audience. Let's fully try to understand this. And even if you're just, the regular consumer, you're looking at this stuff like, I don't necessarily fully know what the consequences of these moves are going to be, but I do know that they mean something different for me. So I want to talk about them, and they're exciting just on that level. And so I think that like this whole concept is kind of what's happening over, like with Jim Ryan and with PlayStation right now. The company's in a strong position, and yet we are looking for reasons where we're looking for where the company might stumble, because it's riding so high. A stumble would be very dramatic, and so we're looking like, is there a chance that could happen? And so any hint of that, it's like, well, let's like take a look. Let's take a closer look. And again, if you were someone who just spent $500, you're like, oh man, is the company going to mess this stuff up for me? Like I spent a lot of money on this console. So I just think this stuff, it's all linked, and it all makes sense if you sort of understand that people are they understand what Sony's good at, and they're sort of over talking about it. And they just want to know, is Sony going to bring new strengths, or will its weaknesses be exploited by its competition? And will people feel regret buying this console? I think that's unlikely, but I understand why people are anxious about that. Now, let's talk about some of the actual concerns and see if there's any like legitimate reason for those issues. I think the big one is Sony seems like it's retreating from non-blockbusters. Of course it's focusing on God of War sequels and The Last of Us sequels and stuff like that, and that makes sense. Those games are the most profitable, but it seems like it is now focused on those games to the exclusion of everything else. I think, to me, one of the good examples of this is indie games, and it's not just like, indie games, like Sony doesn't treat indie games like it did at the beginning of the PS4, and it doesn't. And Jim Ryan said very specifically a few years ago that they weren't going to do that anymore because they don't need to. It's not as relevant. That's how he put it. But really, it seems like they're keeping indie games at arm's length, and I think there's a reason for doing that. But just to explain what I mean, a game like Spelunky 2 does show up in a state of play, but really, when Sony wants to talk about indie games, they do so in a blog post. They have Shuya Yoshida get a bunch of blogs written up, and they put it on their blog post. They're not going to make a big deal out of it. I don't think they want to associate these smaller games with the PlayStation brand in any really overt, big way. They don't want to put these games on the PlayStation stage. Compare that to Microsoft and Nintendo, who both do that pretty frequently now. So why does Sony want to do that? Well, I think it comes down to brand perception and Sony really wanting people to think of its games as special. If you think of a game as a PlayStation game, well, then you better associate it with being premium, the best in its genre, and really you should be associating it with being $70 and being worth $70. And more than that, you should understand that the game's probably not going to go down in price, and it's going to continue to be $70 for quite some time. Smaller games might put a dent in that perception. And not just like indie games, but smaller games from Sony itself. Maybe more importantly, like smaller games from Sony itself. So if you have a Japan Studios that wants to make smaller, weirder Japanese games, you almost can't have that, because you need every game with the PlayStation Studios new like Marvel Studio style logo at the beginning of your game. Every game that has that PlayStation Studios logo at the beginning needs to feel like an event. And any association with the smaller games might damage that perception. The skepticism of Jim Ryan, though, isn't just about his focus on profitable software. I think that is totally fair. Most companies are going to focus on what makes them money. I think it also is about his inability to tell the story of PlayStation in an effective way. He wants to tell that story. He's just not doing a very good job at it, it seems like. And that does seem like to be the underlying issue with his relationship to the PlayStation audience. I already mentioned the damn for the players marketing, motto or whatever. And listen, it's marketing. It is marketing, and we shouldn't fall into the trap of ever believing marketing. But I do think we can admit when marketing is effective and for what reasons it is effective. And I think that was effective for the story I laid out earlier, where people could look at the PlayStation 4 and they could look at the Xbox One. And when Sony said we're making something for the players, people bought into that and they believed it. And they believed it because of the things they saw coming out of the executives at Sony and the way that they were talking about the products. So when Sony is like shifting away from smaller games and focusing exclusively on big blockbusters, that's coming at the same time as the company seems to be shifting away its focus from being centered on the player and what the player is asking for and what the player wants, being focused again on the blockbusters. And what I mean by that is, Jim Ryan seems to have this idea that he can hold up the blockbusters and make them so important, make them, turn them into such big events that people will just come to PlayStation to play those sort of no matter what. Now, the new motto is play has no limits or something. And again, it's a slogan. Let's not read into it too much, except for, let's read into it. To me, that almost sounds like we're making games so good that there is no limit on what you will do to play these games. And that seems like the strategy. That seems like we're going to make stuff you can't ignore, and everything else will follow after that. If we just make the blockbusters so good you can't ignore them, you're going to show up, you're going to pay the extra money, you're not going to wait for a sale because you know that the game's never going to go down in price. And I think that is inherently less compelling than the idea that this is a company that is making games for you, as opposed to you are coming for the games. Do you see the difference there? Maybe not. I see a distinction there, and I think it's important. I think what it comes down to is Jim Ryan does need to tell a better story. I think he understands that he needs to build a strong narrative around PlayStation. I just think he is doing it in the wrong direction. He's holding up the games as the pillar and saying, you come to the games, instead of saying, you are the gamer, Sony's going to come to you. I don't want to, I'm trying not to buy too hard into the marketing, but I think these are the perceptions that people have about Sony, and what's shifted is during the PS4 era, Sony was listening to gamers and coming to the gamers. And now Sony is making games and expecting gamers to come to the games. And, I think you can look at something like the Marvel Studio style PlayStation Studios logo opening cinematic thing and say that, he is trying to make those games feel like an event. And so he understands that he should be telling a story. But the problem is that it's hard to sort of believe that even Jim Ryan cares about these games. He has said stuff that makes him seem like, older games he doesn't really care about it, but he's never really even spoken about the big games in a way that makes you sort of want to buy into what he's selling. And I think a good point of comparison here is Shawn Layden. I was going to talk about Satoru Iwata, but that almost seems unfair because we've mythologized him so much at this point. I think it's worth examining how even before he died, we were mythologizing Satoru Iwata, and him taking a pay cut. I'm doing it already. Taking a pay cut instead of like laying people off, like him and Miyamoto made a big deal of like cutting their salaries in half or something like that instead of laying anybody off during the lean days of the Wii U. And how, Iwata helped program Pokemon to make sure it could fit on a Game Boy cartridge, and he solved the problem that Miyamoto was having with making Super Mario or swim in the swimming levels, and he's just like, let's just use the stuff we got from Balloon Fight. Iwata, he's this mythological figure, but that's part of what I'm talking about. He told a story around himself, and Nintendo told a story around himself, and this is the kind of story that when gamers hear that, they respond to it. And then Iwata goes on stage and says, on my business card, it says, I'm president, and in my brain, I'm a developer, but in my heart, I'm a gamer. And he says that, in the room at GDC all cheers, because what happens there is it makes it sound like, boy, he really cares about the games. And if he cares that much about the games, it's okay if I care that much about the games, right? And back to Shawn Layden, I think Shawn Layden did a really excellent job of selling the same thing. He wasn't as effective as Satoru Iwata, but no one ever has been. But it was like E3 6 years ago or so. He was finishing up an E3 presentation, and he talked about Vib Ribbon, a game that he worked on as a producer, I believe, something that he was clearly proud of. And he's like, someone mentioned Vib Ribbon earlier, and I'm just really happy they did that. Vib Ribbon was an experimental rhythm game, and it wasn't a multi-million seller, is how he puts it. And he goes on to say, but that didn't matter. It tried something new. Basically, I'm paraphrasing now. It tried something new, and that's really what it's all about. That's what we want to be doing at PlayStation. After all, it's about the games, or something to that effect. And again, it is this idea that PlayStation cares about the games. Sean Layden cares about the games that the company is making, and they want to do something new and exciting for you. They want to make these games that they care about so much and then give them to you. Isn't that a precious thing? Again, this is storytelling, it is marketing, but it's effective. And this is something that Sony has stopped doing, I believe. I don't think Jim Ryan has ever gotten on stage and said, I care about these games so much, so you should care about those games so much, in so many words. Instead, what he's doing is, and I think this is far less effective, he's saying, I'm going to charge $70 for these games because they're so premium and prestigious, so you should care about them. So yeah, I think that's going to do it. I know that was very rambly. I recorded this very late, but it was more like something I wanted to get off my chest. I'm going to write this up. I'm going to write this down and put it on GameSpeed as well, in a much more coherent form, hopefully. But mostly I wanted to try to explain what I see as the issue right now. And really it's a lowercase I issue. These are things where they are potential weaknesses at worst for Sony. If the games come out and they are as good as they were last generation and better, it's not going to really have any problems, is it? Because that's what people show up for. And those indie games are still going to come to the PlayStation 5. And third-party games and free-to-play stuff, the next Fortnite or whatever, it'll all end up on the PlayStation 5, and you'll be able to play it there as well. And then you'll have the big Sony games in between to keep you occupied as well, or to bring new people in. When I look down the line, I see maybe some bumpy times for Sony, possibly, but it's not. I don't think it's anything that it can't figure out. I do think maybe the bigger issue is just Jim Ryan's narrative that he's trying to build. Gamers are very particular. I think it's the best way. It's the kindest way to put it. We are very particular. We do mythologize CEOs of video game companies like Satoru Iwata, and we almost and I almost feel like, yeah, that we're talking about a creative medium here. Video games it's a creative expression. It's art, and yeah, come out and tell us that you believe in it, because what the hell are we doing here? If the guy selling me this stuff doesn't believe in it, why the hell am I spending not just my money but my time on it? I want to feel something when I play these games, and I want to feel that energy, that same energy coming off the people who are trying to sell it to me. I think if I were Jim Ryan, I would really sort of go, I would just, go to the guest house in the backyard of my mansion or whatever. I would get all the PlayStations. I would just hook them all up, and I would binge on a bunch of great games for a long time and just try to find what I love about these games. And every time I was in public, I would bring something up new that I love about PlayStation games. I would come up with a new anecdote about something that only PlayStation games have ever done, or this just relate to us. It'll work, And if you don't, oh well, you're probably still going to be making quite a bit of money. But if the generation goes on and this anxiety continues, it'll be because Jim Ryan never found out how to talk to gamers. And I think it's a solvable problem. I think at the very least, maybe put someone else out there to talk for PlayStation who is able to speak in that way. And maybe that's the solution instead. Jim Ryan strikes me as a pragmatic guy, but he also strikes me as the kind of guy that has, an ego. I think he thinks he should be in this position. I think he helped build up PlayStation in Europe, and so he should be the one in charge. And I think that's fair. The proof's in the pudding, all that stuff. That doesn't mean that you need to be the one person always doing interviews, or the one person talking on stage or talking in live streams or anything like that. I think you put another executive out there and say, hey, go relate to these kids. Say, say what you like about the games and help us build that story in a way that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Again, very rambly. Sorry. That's just how I'm going to do these. I don't want to read from a script. And so I'm stuck with this stupid brain that I have where I just spout it all off. I know. Thank you for watching this long. If you did, let me know what you think in the comments. If you disagree, I think that's fine. I don't really think I was attacking PlayStation ever. I think at worst I was trying to find out why people seem anxious. The whole point was why are people anxious with Jim Ryan? Let's examine that. That's what I was trying to do. So I hope you don't feel like I was attacking your your favorite, your number one GF or whatever. All right, I'm tired. I'm gonna get out of here. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, have a good one and goodbye.